Welcome back to Second Breakfast and our ongoing film discussions, bringing you the best thoughts, theories, and literary analysis this side of the Alamo Drafthouse.
Look at you with that intro, just making it roll smoothly into all of our other stuff.
This is the third week in a row that we've seen a movie that we loved so much that we had to push our entire schedule.
It's crazy how that keeps happening. I mean,
It's wonderful.
What a terrible problem to have.
But we're getting into that season.
Yeah.
And I feel like, I say this every week, but I'm more excited about this one than I even was about the last ones. This is, I feel like, okay. So this movie is all about the spoilers. So
Right.
we're going to talk as much as we can for about a minute, and then we're going to go into a spoiler warning.
Yeah.
But just in terms of a simple recommendation, oh my God, go see this movie. It is the most fun I've had at the movies since Saltburn. And you guys know from that mammoth episode we did on Saltburn, that was probably our favorite movie of last year.
Yeah, it might have been. It was up there for sure.
And I had just as much fun with Strange Darling. I would advise you to go in knowing absolutely as little as possible. Don't even listen to the rest of this episode.
I was gonna say, maybe stop here.
Come back. We'll signpost it in a minute.
Yeah.
But the surprises in the film, from the setting to obviously the revelations and twists later on, it is just sharp as a tack. It's a drama that it's got some thriller, maybe shades of horror and some other stuff in there, but it is 90 minutes of spiraling, beautiful, thrilling drama. And as the last little cherry on top, this is one of the best looking movies of this year.
I was going to say, it looks so good. And at the beginning of the movie, it says this was all shot on 35 millimeter. And some people are calling that pretentious and annoying.
Idiots.
And I understand that criticism, but also like, oh no, how dare a filmmaker love film? Like,
no, fuck that. Attention to craft and analog techniques. That's nothing to turn your nose up at, because it just pays dividends. It just looks better. There's a richness to the frame. You will not see a movie with better color this year.
Right. I think, and I loved this movie. It was reveling in being a movie. You could tell it was having a really good time. The 6-part structure, but out of order, non-linear storytelling.
Careful.
That's fine. That's fine.
I didn't want to know that before I went in.
Well, I'm sorry. Anyway, the way it's structured is so interesting and fun, and you can tell it's just having a really good time. And I love when I can tell a filmmaker loves their own movie. It's
fantastic.
Yeah.
The performances, it's just so absorbing and interesting, entertaining, engaging. It's beautiful to look at, to listen to. We'll get into some of that. And just to think about afterwards.
Yeah.
It's one of those 90 minutes in and out, and I'm still chewing on it days later. So that is our pitch. That is our first blush impressions. Now we are putting up the wall of fire, the spoiler warnings, and the rest of this episode is going to be our spoiler thoughts. We have some more structured thoughts and theories and ideas we want to play with, so please go check out this movie. I'm sure it's playing near you in a tiny theater. It's a small release, but this will be the most fun you have putting your butt in a seat for a movie this year. It's just fantastic. Okay, we're on the other side of the spoiler wall.
Because you can't talk about it without spoiling it because of the twist, because of everything that this movie turns out to be. So you have to talk about it.
Like what?
Well, okay. So I remember when we saw the trailer for this, and I thought, that looks lame. Because the trailer doesn't reveal anything. I mean, if you watch the trailer closely, I guess, and read the reviews that pop up on the screen, you can maybe kind of figure it out. But Cam and I see movies so much that we see trailers a lot. And so I often will see a trailer like 5 or 10 times, before I see the actual movie. So I try hard not to watch trailers too much because I don't want to see the whole movie before I see the movie. But I've heard this trailer a lot. Like often it'll come on and then I'll just like look down at my phone or something. So I've heard a lot of the lines spoken in this movie a lot. And the lines that really gave me the ick and maybe not want to see this movie, understandably, were it's when the lady and the guy, I don't even know, do they have names? It's the lady and
the demon.
The demon, yes. So the guy and the woman, they're in the car and she says, "Do you have any idea the kinds of risks a woman like me takes when she decides to have a little fun?" And he says, "I hadn't thought about it that way." And she goes, "Of course not. You're not a woman." And this is so, I can tell now it's so intentionally done. But this conversation feels so 2010s BuzzFeed feminism. And it's so frustrating because obviously she's right. But we're so tired of hearing that. We all know that. We all know that just existing as a woman, never mind dating, is risky, and especially compared to men. Like, women just are at greater risk of violence and all kinds of things. But it's like, we've heard all this before. We did the, oh, do you want to see the bear or the man in the woods? We've seen and we've done all of that. We know. None of that is interesting anymore. None of that is new. And the way that, like, what made me so frustrated by this line delivery was that the character...
In the trailer, you mean?
Yes. The character is presenting this idea like it's groundbreaking. And she's like, well, of course not. You're not a woman. Like he's never heard this before. And so that made me feel like, oh God, you know. But we ended up seeing the movie just because we had like heard, actually some people were saying it's good and like maybe we should give it a shot. And I'm so glad we did, obviously, because it is turning that whole thing on its head. It is meant to make you annoyed at her, and then you sort of begin to understand more. Because the other thing she asks him is, she goes, I have to ask you something. Are you a serial killer? And that is such a dumb thing to say because, number one, if he was, he wouldn't tell you. So why are you bothering asking? And two, using the phrase serial killer as like a blanket term is, again, a very like cringy 2010s thing to do, because like if you zoom out and like think about it, like that's actually a very specific term, and being an actual serial killer is a very, very rare thing statistically. Like, most men who are harming a woman on a date aren't a full-blown serial killer. They're much more likely like sitting on some spectrum from like semi-disrespectful to like actually assaulting you or even killing you, but that doesn't make you a serial killer. And so using serial killer as this blanket term is like just this very 2010s thing to do, and it makes you sound kind of stupid and out of touch with reality.
It's kind of a nod to that 2010s obsession that women had with true crime.
Well, exactly.
Right?
That's what it is.
Okay,
It's like I feel like every woman my age went through this phase where and I've talked about this on the show before, where as you become an adult and you become sort of like exposed to and start to understand the world a little bit better and start to think about like the realities of being a woman, you start to get into true crime, and then you get obsessed with it, and then every Netflix documentary on the planet is about true crime, and there are 85,000 podcasts. And so as you immerse yourself in the true crime world, you start to assume that every man is a serial killer, and that's just not, obviously it's not true. And it is such a like out of touch thing to think about. Again, the realities that women face when dating and like being around men are very real and true, and it's complicated and messy and scary, but it's not, every man you meet is not, you know, the Golden State Killer, like, obviously.
Right.
And so this woman like saying all of these things and like presenting them as like almost kind of annoying and eye-rolly is really interesting, because it's playing with those expectations, and you as you're watching the movie, before you understand what's really going on, you kind of hate her and find her annoying, even though you of course agree with what she's saying. You're like, obviously, yes, I agree with you. Women have it very difficult, and like they face violence, and it's scary, and there's always the fear that the guy you go on a date with is going to be a serial killer, but you just kind of don't like her. And it's really annoying.
Is it like a presentation or a tonal thing?
It's
kind of that self-satisfied.
Again, it's like as if it's this groundbreaking thing. And so when you find out that she is in fact the killer, it makes it much more interesting, because it makes you grapple with that. You're like, oh, why did I dislike her so much? Like, when what she's saying is true, but also like it just makes it really complicated, and it makes you kind of feel bad, but also not at the same time.
That she's weaponizing that. It almost, in retrospect, makes that scene. And I agree. I think the trailer sets this up to be a movie that the actual movie is almost satirizing.
Yes, exactly.
So
it is sort of making fun of that and sort of exposing how useless that 2010s approach is.
But you do need to kind of gesture at I mean, it's hard because then you're doing the magic trick within the trailer. Mm-hmm. But I agree. I think the trailer sets up a different, not nearly as fantastic as this movie is.
Right, exactly. And I like that. I like that it's playing with your expectations and being like, haha, gotcha. You know, I think it's very funny. But I think, what it's really doing is exposing that, not the values themselves of the 2010s BuzzFeed feminism. It's not saying that those values and ideas are bad, but it's exposing how useless that approach is. Like this, like just saying women have it harder, men are trash, sexism is bad. Like just saying those things doesn't actually do anything. It's like an incredibly basic first step and doesn't actually result in tangible or significant results or changes.
There's a performative quality to it.
Exactly. It's that SJW thing. It's like the internet phenomenon of just saying something that like feels important and then like leaning back and smiling like, oh, I've done my part. Like I'm done now. I've made social change. Like actually doing that doesn't really accomplish anything. And so this woman is sort of, like you said, weaponizing that idea and sort of calling attention to it for us as well and making us realize kind of how feeble it is. Like I think the cops at the end really sort of exemplify this really well. It's, you know, after she's killed the guy, she's, you know, pretends like she's been assaulted by the guy, and the two cops show up. It's a woman and a man. And like the woman cop says, you know, well, of course we should believe her. And she says something like, I forget the actual line, but when the male cop is like not really listening to her or not agreeing with her,
yes.
She says like, my vagina doesn't make my opinion less worth listening to or something. But she doesn't take any action to like investigate the scene. She barely questions the woman. She's just saying stuff like, oh, we should believe her. Oh, we need to help her, obviously. Like she's not actually taking any action and doing anything past just saying what feels like the right thing to say.
And the guy says the right thing. He says, we don't know if she's the victim yet.
And he like tries to take action, but he's kind of shut down by her. And then so both of them kind of fail to take action, and that results in their deaths. And I don't think this movie is at all being like, see, men are right and women are wrong. Like it's not doing that. It's pointing out the futility of this approach of like just saying what feels right is not actually going to accomplish anything. And I really liked that.
I think it's about the falsity and performance. As much as I think you can compare the demon, the male lead, to performing sort of a traditional masculinity. And I mean that in like the Tom Selleck retro sort of way, when he's got the stylized sunglasses on, the deep yellow kind of Bono filter, and he's got the classic mustache and the truck and the shotgun under the back seat.
Right, and he's a cop.
They're both doing performances, and they're switching through those roles and almost code switching in the different company that they keep.
Right.
I think it's about that deeply human thing of performance, manipulation, finger to the wind. I don't think it's political. No. I don't think it's about any of that sort of modern discourse. This is not a discourse movie.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. No,
it's about human nature, but it's doing that within a modern time period.
And I think you can really see that in the way that they treat the lady, the serial killer. Like, I loved that because they so easily could have just made her a girl boss and could have made her like, there was none of this, like, once I figured out who she was, I was no longer rooting for her. There was no like, I support women's wrongs, like, yes, queen, like, you get, like, there was none of that. Like, I wasn't like, yes, be a lady serial killer, kill all those men. We didn't have this, like, terrible backstory of, like, all the men who have wronged her, and that's why she became a serial killer, and that's why she tries to kill men. Because I've said this before on the show a lot. I think movies are so afraid to make women evil, lest the audience dare think that perhaps the movie makers think all women are bad. And so instead they feel like they have to like create backstories and justify like the reason, like justify the actions that the woman is taking and like blame their sins on somebody else, usually a man, like make the reason the woman is bad because of something bad a man did. And instead this movie treated this character how male characters are treated, which is evil in their own right. Like interesting, scary, and she's evil not just because a man hurt her. Like she's not just like evil without any reason. We understand her, we see her motivations, we see her humanity. The first half of the movie lets us see her humanity. Like we see her as a victim and we're afraid of her or afraid for her. And we see her genuine fear and like panic and all of that and problem solving. But she's not like excused. Her sins are not excused.
There's a condescension to that when you absolve women of all responsibility or agency. That was why that was the main, not to bring it back to this again, but that was the fuck up that defined season 2 of House of the Dragon.
Right, exactly.
And this movie doesn't do that. It doesn't have that condescension. I mean, I'm broad brushing here. What was the best movie of the 2010s? Gone Girl.
Yeah.
This is the best role, and regardless of gender, that was Amy Dunn. That was the best role anyone had in the 2010s.
It was incredible.
This is at that level, because when we talk about complicated, dense, challenging, fucked up, contradictory, messy roles, we talk about usually, especially in the 2010s, we talk about anti-heroes And those roles were mostly men. I mean, you can
Right.
pull it back to Tony Soprano and
Sure.
Bryan Cranston in Breaking. It's all of those roles that are the meatiest and the messiest. And there's no concept of endorsing those actions.
Of course
But by
not.
God, it is so fun to watch.
Right.
And Rosamund Pike did that as well as any of the people I just named in Gone Girl. And Willa Fitzgerald in this movie is absolutely on the shelf with all of those people.
Yes, and she's so interesting to watch, and it's so interesting to watch her kind of code switch as she's around different people, and like as the movie goes on, and because of the nonlinear story, like it's so fascinating. You really feel like you understand her. Like every time something happens in a chapter 2 that helps make chapter 4 make more sense, like that's so fascinating. And so she's this incredibly well-rounded, fascinating, freaky character that you hate but can't stop watching and like can't wait to see what she does next. Like she's so interesting, and I feel like people are so afraid to make female characters like that because we're like, oh no, they're gonna think that we think girls are bad. It's so embarrassing.
Yeah, there's a fear that seeps into that. But I think this role and this performance feels utterly fearless. I think this is the closest anyone's gotten to a Patrick Bateman type role.
Yeah, for sure.
And it is that unhinged and uninhibited. Where if you don't go into American Psycho thinking, oh, I wonder if this movie is endorsing this bad man and what he's doing. Like,
yeah, if a guy likes American Psycho, it's a red flag. You
got to be better.
Oh my
gosh!
gosh!
And similarly, I think there's a black comedy. There is an understated but venomous satire, which you can either watch American Psycho and only pay attention to the satire, or you can watch it and not care about that at all.
Right.
And it's just this weird kind of fucked up fable about the 80s and the stock market and all that.
Sure.
But I think this has that similar duality.
Yeah.
There's so much here, and it moves so quickly that I could watch this 3 different times and look at different parts of the screen and get different interpretations.
Totally. I also liked that they made her, often when writers are trying to make a strong female character, they just write her as a man. And I liked that the way that this electric lady goes about, capturing and killing these men, she doesn't do it in a way that a man would. She understands the power she has as a woman and uses that to her advantage and does things like, poisoning people with ketamine and getting a taser and stuff instead of like, tying them up and throwing them in her car like a male serial killer. Yeah, because of course she couldn't do that. She's a tiny little woman. And so I felt like they really understood this character, and I really believed her and was afraid of her and was fascinated by her and was terrified of her. Like, the way that a good male murderer character is written, like it worked so well. And it was just so refreshing to see a fascinating female character.
It was. Yeah, it was gratifying.
Yeah.
I'm glad you took that breath there because this did feel like that. There was an exhalation. There was a breath of fresh air. I couldn't love this movie more. So I want to zoom out a little bit because I don't like making these kind of statements, but I think kind of want to here. I feel like this is kind of a landmark moment in American film, in indie film.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I feel like this is one of those movies that decades from now, we're going to look back and say, damn, that was influential. Because influential doesn't have anything to do with money.
Sure.
Plenty of the John Carpenter movies that have become the most influential movies in drama, thriller, horror, sci-fi for the thing. A lot of those movies bombed and were hated on their release.
Yeah, weren't like commercially successful at all.
Yeah, it's not about that.
And also like weren't that expensive to make, and
And we'll get there for this, but this influential in a cultural sense, it is about ideas and usually aesthetics. And like I talked about the yellow glasses on the demon, that cherry red car that she's driving. Everything you said, this looks like a movie. I think that sense of being a glorious movie, the artifice of it, the color, the wigs, that sense of fun, I hope that this is kind of a landmark moment where that swings back into favor.
I hope so too. I feel like there's been a real focus on like grittiness and reality. I think a lot of things like, I don't know, not House of Cards, because House of Cards is so hyperbolic, but just in terms of style, there's been such an interest in making things as realistic as possible and as like grounded as possible. And I love something that's grounded. I find that fascinating. It's interesting. But I feel like we've lost a lot of style in the last, 10, 15 years. And
Totally.
This movie had a great amount of style. I think somebody who's pushing against that is somebody like Yorgos Lanthimos. His movies are incredibly stylized and fascinating and absurd. And also his latest movie, Kinds of Kindness, played with this like multi-part,
that's a good pull.
That was more like miniature movies. It wasn't like chapters because they were entirely different stories, but
there was an interplay.
Exactly. Like this interest in playing with structure and having style and just being playful. Like I feel like people are afraid to be playful.
That was my next point. The structure is playful. It's twisty. It's efficient. It's propulsive. I mean, the script is as good as anything else here. And I'm so really happy to say that. And when you compare that to some of these trends that have bugged the shit out of both of us, you talked about kind of that self-importance, that idea of presenting these like basic ass thoughts as being revelations that you speak into the camera, considering yourself like capital I important in your film is this kind of this Sermon on the Mount that everyone has to gather around and listen to as you present these, just basic observations in lieu of storytelling. That, I mean, even that label of elevated horror, that kind of afraid of your own shadow, embarrassed of the genre. I think to counter your point about the 35 millimeter initially with kind of the shadow boxing there, I don't think there's any pretension in this movie at all. I think there's more pretense in the movies that it's kind of satirizing. The real monster is grief. All that like navel-gazy bullshit. By contrast, Strange Darling is just a sucker punch. The direction, the script, the acting, the cinematography, shout out Giovanni Ribisi.
Incredible.
It's
so
just
good.
90 minutes of here's what we can do. Here's what movies could be.
Right.
And we've talked about budgets a lot. The budget for this movie is $4 million. And it looks better than any $200 million, $350 million movie you've seen.
Wow.
It's just... it's just hustle.
Yeah.
It's just spirit and passion. And you can feel that alongside that sense of fun, there is a rigor and a discipline that you can feel in every scene here. And I really want this. I mean, it feels like one of those watershed evolutions. And I think it's particularly an evolution of the art house sort of horror that we love. We talk about Neon and all these other kind of small studios and production companies. I think given the playful structure, given that movie-ass aesthetic, I think decades from now, this could feel like kind of the Pulp Fiction moment of the A24 era.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Does that make? Do you think there's a shot there? Is there a chance?
I think so. I mean, we've even seen lately. There's been this trend of having chapters, like chapter titles.
That was my next point.
Sorry,
no. Please.
But like we saw that in Furiosa. There was another thing we saw it. Long Legs is in 3 chapters, I think. And I said Kinds of Kindness is like 3 miniature stories, but still
with title cards.
But yeah, like having chapters and like titling those chapters. I feel like that's been a trend, and I think that's really interesting. Again, people are having fun with structure and playing around, and we've seen the nonlinear plot is not a new thing, but it's fun to see that be played with. So no, I can see this being like kind of a touchstone. Yeah, I hope so. And I smile. I don't know if this is just a me thing, but when I see title cards, when I see chapter titles, I smile because it feels like they're having fun. Like that locks me in, that endears me. And I've loved this trend. It's mostly been this year that we've seen a lot of movies with these chapters. I thought it was kind of done the best here because of that sense of fun. I mean, Longlegs is leaning in and enjoying those things. Yeah. But there's just a sense of fun here that I think Longlegs is too cold and nasty for, but to its credit. Yeah, right. It's going for something else. It's a different kind of movie, yeah. But I thought the chapters here, because there were 6 of them, and the movie's barely 90 minutes, again, a compliment, I thought having those chapters kept the movie going at such an incredible pace. To the point that they almost felt like scenes. And then the titles of the chapters were great too, because I remember in both Longlegs and Furiosa, I could not for the life of me remember the names of the chapters. I remembered all 6 in this one because they were really interesting lines of dialogue that are taken out of context. And the entire time you're watching the chapter, the section of the movie, you're looking for that. And not in a way that's distracting in the way that takes you out of it, but you're waiting for it. And then when you hear it, you're like, oh, it's a little tease. It's a revelation once you discover it. And so then you remember Here Kitty Kitty and Mr. Snuffles and all the other ones. Like I just thought it was really cleverly done. But you're never juggling too much in your head. Because after you finished a chapter, kind of, maybe this is just how my brain works, but I kind of like flush the toilet and start over from scratch in the next scene. Especially because we're going out of order anyway. Right. But so the movie's never asking me to hold on to too much. Like the movie is a puzzle, especially the way we jump around those chapters. Yeah.
but I was never distracted. Everything was so perfectly calibrated. It just felt fun. And I think that goes down to every level of the presentation. The music almost sounding like Succession, having engaging that sort of classical music in the background as we do things that are silly and bold and colorful. And instead of just splashing up chapter 6, the numbers move, the way they rotate up and down.
Oh
and
yeah,
move
you like
across
see
the
numbers. Yes, you can see the sort of almost randomization of it.
But it's wicked. It's delicious. It's smirking. It's got all of that fun. There's a bite to it, but it always feels fun. In the same way, it doesn't matter what Christian Bale is doing. There's a sense of fun in that movie that almost makes you feel guilty, but you can't look away from it. You feel almost complicit.
Right.
That's what I love. I love that more than anything. That's how I felt watching Saltburn. I think that's why that experience was so fucking fun. And even though we jump all across this timeline, we get all these cliffhangers and revelations, I was always locked in. It was like, I mean, even to kind of literalize that term, plot twist, it felt like we were twisting the narrative tighter and tighter. And that tension was so much fun.
Yeah, it was.
The last thing I want to talk about here. First, I have to hand wave the obvious thing. I am not going to do 20 minutes on this, but literally you made me think of it while we were talking. This is absolutely a Faustus story. It's about two characters, and the thing I love about Faustus, and I've talked about this forever, and the Longlegs video did well enough that I get to talk about Faustus whenever the fuck I want to.
Sure, I guess you've earned that right.
The thing that's fun about Faustus, one of the guys is the conjurer, one is the demon. So does the demon have the power because he can give this guy what he wants, or does the guy have the power because he has the soul? And
because he summoned the demon in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
And the reason that play is the best work of art ever made is the power plays. It is the role reversals of not knowing who's in charge or who has the power in any given scene. It's the playfulness. It's the dynamism within that one dynamic.
Sure.
That's why it's the best work of art ever made. This movie does that. Also, one of the characters is literally called the demon.
Right.
I'm not getting into it.
And she sees demons. Like, that's why she kills the men, because she sees them as demons.
I'm not getting into it, but it's there.
Okay.
And I'm acknowledging it.
Love it.
And I think it's part of why I like that movie so much. But I want to talk about...
Stay tuned. In 2 days, Cam will have a follow-up solo episode.
No, I promise. I'm not. I'm not. That was enough for me. But I want to talk about one of our other favorites because I try to, again, flush the toilet. I don't try to solve movies while I'm watching them. I don't try to think ahead or outsmart it. But I found myself thinking about one of our kind of cornerstone touch point horror movies while I was watching this movie. I was just clocking these little observations. And this is where we get to talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh, okay.
So I was reminded a little bit of some of my other favorite playful, short, art house horror movies of the last few years, Pearl and X, those Ty West movies. We're not talking about Maxine here.
No, we're not.
we do on Patreon. Go check that out.
Yeah, we did it on Patreon. Yeah.
So I think Pearl and X I love for a lot of reasons, but it's a fantastic, central, rough, villainous female performance. There's some of that.
Yeah.
But it's also this almost mythic preoccupation with Texas Chainsaw Massacre. All of those different elements. We did all three of these movies in bonus episodes on Patreon. But Pearl, we talked about kind of the family that you get to at the end of Chainsaw. I think Pearl is kind of a meditation on how that family comes to be.
Yes.
How you get Grandpa in the attic and all that weird shit. And X obviously deals with it on a more practical level. You have the massacre, you have the setting. But I think the way Texas Chainsaw Massacre is evoked and kind of chewed on throughout Strange Darling is different. It's more structural, it's less literal than Pearl carrying around an axe and the movie X being set in Texas. It's less literal than that. But there are moments, there are nods when the woman, the lady, when she hides in that freezer trunk.
Yes. Oh,
I'm
sure.
reminded of Chainsaw.
I did think of that. That was the one time I did think of it. I forgot about that.
And I think this is symbolic, this evoking of this symbol, because if you remember, that freezer trunk is in the room with the meat hook in Texas Chainsaw Massacre, in the house, the Sawyer house, and that is where the dead body is stored.
Right.
And this is a character who is clocking and exploiting people's assumptions.
Yes.
So her hiding there in a place where dead bodies are usually stored is as crafty and sneaky as any other sort of thing that she exploits.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean?
Well, and I think it points to her, like, she's intentionally presenting herself as a victim to people around her in order to get what she wants. But I think also she, in a sense, does see herself as a victim in a lot of ways. And I think that might be part of her psychology and how she justifies doing things. We don't see her as a victim, but she does. And so I think placing herself in that freezer, I think also kind of maybe speaks to this, some sort of inner unconscious idea she might have about herself as, like seeing herself as something that's been hurt and, put away.
Yeah, there are 5 more I have here. One of them is kind of the culture shock. And this is a part of Texas Chainsaw Massacre that I don't see played with as much as some of the more obvious ones. So instead of having this kind of small town Texas culture shock of the hicks and they're scary and the teeth and class divides, here you have that, but it's with a different setting.
Yeah.
It's with these, quote unquote, mountain people.
Yeah. Or up in Oregon. Yeah.
Right. And that's a total culture shock.
Yes.
And a total change of pace and class and life. So I thought that was a smart way to almost evoke the structure instead of that particular commentary.
Sure. Well, and the mountain people she encounters are not what she thought they were going to be. She said, they're like, well, no, we're just old hippies. We don't have any guns.
I'll jump to that one next.
Yeah.
It's these villainous role reversals. So you have a lot of these in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Even though you don't have that many characters, most of them turn out to be evil. The dad, who initially is just the guy with the teeth at the gas station, when he turns out to be bad, I think you have obviously some of that here with the mountain people, with the lady, and again, to what you just said about the freezer trunk, there's this idea that Leatherface is kind of sympathetic, kind of innocent.
Yeah, kind of like not mentally all the way there, so you think, is he being manipulated? You feel bad for him, yeah.
But there's also that code switching of him wearing these different costumes and taking on these different faces and identities. And I think the lady has a lot of that too. But again, it's more sneaky.
Yeah.
It's more calculated.
She does go through a lot of costume changes.
Right. It's wigs instead of human faces. It's not as immediately scary to people. But you're taking that to the extreme with the ultimate reversal of who the serial killer is. Another one that I clocked here is the extended sequences of stalking characters through the woods. Having that chase sequence of bad guy with a weapon and someone else kind of hiding and moving through the woods. I thought that's always the scary part of Chainsaw that I forget when I rewatch the movie. That always bothers me, but I don't think about it after the fact.
Because it doesn't feel like part of the setting. You picture the house. You always picture the house, right? Then you're like, oh shit, the woods also. It's very scary.
But this had that level of sneakiness for me. One of the more overt kind of counters from Texas Chainsaw that I noticed here was the beginning. We didn't even talk about this, but you have the text on a black screen with a very stern, formal, masculine voiceover talking about the history and infamy of these killings.
That's true.
That is so Chainsaw.
That's so true. I also remembering now, I did think of that as well. Yeah, that's very funny.
This is another one that's... I don't know how to define this one, but this one is the one that really stuck with me. It's this visual symmetry. It's this really striking, permeating, almost overpowering setting and sense of place. So in Chainsaw, you can tell that it is hot as balls in every single frame. Like, you don't have to read the trivia on IMDb to see that it was filmed during a heat wave.
Yeah, it looks awful.
Everything looks sweaty and bleached and burned and just gross. Just like it's on the surface of the sun. Steaming is a perfect way to put that.
Yeah.
Here, you get a similar intensity, but in a markedly different setting. I would say as burned and bleached as Chainsaw is, here in Strange Darling, you have an intensity of the forest, of the lushness, of the color, of the bright lights, even to the point of the bright red light in the bathroom.
Yeah, it's or even the blue light when they're sitting in front of the hotel.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The blue in the car coming from one little bit of neon would not drench them like they're in a nightclub.
Right.
But that's part of that style.
Exactly.
It's part of that inescapable, aggressive sense of place or environment. It's inescapable for the characters and the audience. I thought that was just fantastic. So yeah, this it doesn't matter if it's on purpose or not, but I thought this evoked some of the best and strongest and kind of unsung moments of Texas Chainsaw Massacre for me, in addition to Pulp Fiction and American Psycho. I mean, the things you throw in the smoothie to make this movie are my favorite works of art.
It's true.
I cannot believe how much I love this movie. I would genuinely go see this like 3 or 4 more times.
Yeah, I would too. It was a really special movie. I had a really good time watching it.
What a wonderful surprise. I mean, we've talked about this the last 2 weeks. Alien, Romulus, and Sing Sing. Both fantastic. These 3, I mean, what a murderer's row for surprises in 2024.
Yeah, no, this was a really fun one. I so hope, I mean, if you haven't seen it, we just ruined it for you. But I so
hopefully
hope,
we sold it to you.
I hope so. I hope more people go and see this because it was really special. And I feel like you can tell they worked really hard on this movie and that it's really thoughtfully crafted and it wasn't just like, churned out in a big studio and like, here's your next fucking Star Wars show.
It's passion and style and voice and perspective.
Yeah.
This was just so good. Please go check it out.
Yes.
Oh.
And let us know what you thought of this movie. Let us know any ideas you have, what you think about what we said. If you're on YouTube, you can comment below. If you're on our Patreon, you can comment on the Patreon post. Otherwise, send us an email, secondbreakfastpod. Check out all of our other movie discussions. We have about 4 trillion now.
Yeah, most of those have been bonus episodes lately. We have a breakfast buffet series where we do 3 or 4 or up to 7 sometimes works of art, and a lot of them lately have been movies and kind of these weirder, taking some risky chances horror movies. So check that out over on Patreon. We've got all sorts of other series and fantasy stuff, but always with the horror. Well, we would never want to escape these kind of horror-y discussions. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be back in just a few days with another brand new episode.